Hi everyone. So we're on to chapter 4 of Sky Song. Flint. We're still on Flint. Eska shook her head. You don't know the Ice Queen like I do. We won't stand a chance now she knows I'm free. Pebbles slid further into Flint's hood, as if he could sense that he was largely to blame for this turn of events, while Flint's gaze faltered between the arch he had come through and the door leading on into the heart of Winterfang. He stormed across the hall towards the latter, leaving Eska trembling beside the music box. But as Flint approached the doorway, the silver branches closed over the frame, barring his way on into the palace. And then footsteps sounded from a passageway beyond the door, heels clacking closer, followed by the slow swish of a gown. The stories of the Ice Queen swirled inside him. She wears a dress made from the frozen tears of her prisoners. She can hex animals under her control with one strike of her staff. She can turn children to ice. Flint thought of the inventions he had packed into his rucksack, his camouflage cape made from the fur of snow, hairs then washed in a cascade of sunbeams, and his bone-handled anything knife with a turquoise river gem slotted into the handle. But these inventions had been made to help Flint slip through the passageways unseen, not to fight the Ice Queen, and with an aching heart he realized his rescue mission now lay in tatters at his feet. He raced back towards the arches. Panes of black ice were sliding across them, closing the hall in window by window. The palace darkened as the moonlit light was shut out, but Flint sped on towards the 3 arches still left open. And grabbing the key from the music box, Eska stumbled after him. You are not coming with us, Flint cried as he hoisted himself into the biggest arch and hauled the rope from his rucksack. You've already ruined my chances of freeing my ma. The footsteps beyond the hall grew louder and the flames began to hiss. Flint flung his barbed rope into the wall, then glanced towards the tundra. The guards didn't seem to be out there any longer. Perhaps they were inside the palace now, having summoned the Ice Queen about the strange whistle sounding over the ice, and Flint knew that he only had a few seconds to make this escape work. The black ice burst out from the side of the arch, and Flint gripped the rope and began to abseil down the palace wall. But Eska wasn't giving up. She clambered out onto the arch in the nick of time, her body juddering from the cold, and Flint watched aghast as she grabbed hold of the rope above him, as the last of the windows sealed shut behind her. Flint slipped to the ground, barely using his mittens or his boots to grip the rope this time, and moments later Eska clattered down after him. Her hands and feet raw from the rope. There was an almighty crash as the largest pane of black glass smashed apart. Flint dragged Eska beneath the bridge. He couldn't leave her now. She'd only give his presence away. And yet his mission was careering sideways. He hauled a bundle of clothes from his rucksack, a pair of sealskin boots and mittens, and a parka and trousers made from grizzly bear furs, and tossed them to Eska. They were for Ma, he growled, but you'll need them if we're going to make it out of this alive. He drew out a large and very soft white blanket next. The camouflage cape. I didn't need this on the way here because no one knew I was coming, but now, thanks to you. He shook his head. We need to run fast, beneath the cliffs, and if we stay under this cape, we've a chance of making it unseen. Flint jumped as a high-pitched cry pierced the night sky. Eska! The voice was sharp and shrill, and it swarmed over the driftlands. Flint slid a look up to the palace to see a woman standing in the tallest arch, a crown of snowflakes glinting on her head. His insides clenched. The Ice Queen's teardrop gown fluttered in the wind, and beside the staff she held sat a wolverine, its dark fur a stain against the ice. Flint turned to Eska, tucking her beneath the camouflage cape with him. Run, he whispered, now. And with the sound of the Tusk Guards marching out across the bridge, and the Ice Queen's screech echoing across the kingdom, the 2 children darted out. They kept to the cliffs, their boots pounding against the ice, their breath pent up inside them, and though Eska was unstable on her feet, Flint propped her up and they ran on towards the cavern where the huskies waited. Flint yanked Eska inside the opening in the cliff, and the dogs clustered around them, warm and loyal and ready for the homeward journey. Eska leant against the wall. Free from Winterfang, she panted in disbelief. Free at last. The Ice Queen's voice tore across the ice again, and Eska edged further inside the cavern. Stand on the metal brake between the runners while I attach the dogs, Flint muttered. I don't want them whisking the sled away before we're ready to go. Eska hurried over and pressed down with her boot, but, after the Ice Queen's enchantment, her body was no match for the spirited dogs. The brake flung up, the sled jerked forward, and Eska stumbled over. But Flint was on it in a second, slamming a hand onto the side of the sled until it stopped. Eska picked herself up and wedged her foot down over the metal again as hard as she could. That cape, she whispered, nervously placing her other boot onto the brake to stop it, edging forward. We never would have escaped without it, and it was made using magic, wasn't it? That's the reason we got away. For a second, Flint's shoulders squared with pride. It was the first time anyone had congratulated him on an invention or even been vaguely interested in Erkenwald's magic since the Tusk Chief's death. But then he remembered himself and scowled. Shut up and listen to me. He stamped his boot over Eska's so that it sank deep into the snow and the sled held firm. The cavern widens into a tunnel, and when it comes up on the tundra, we'll be safe, distance away from the palace. The guards might see the huskies, but if we in the sled are tucked under the cape, they'll just look like a pack of wolves running from the distance. And with any luck, we'll make it to Deep Roots without being tailed. Eska nodded. We must be quick, though. We need to get as far as we can while the night hides us. Eska nodded again, avoiding Flint's eyes. She whispered, What's Deep Roots? What's Deep Roots? Flint scoffed as he untangled the ropes and tied the dogs to his sleds. Only the biggest forest in the kingdom and home to the legendary fur tribe. Everyone in Erkenwald knows that. Everyone except me, mumbled Eska. A spot of colour had returned to her cheeks, but the clothes she wore swamped her body, and she looked pitifully frail inside them. Will I be safe with your tribe? Flint looked up. You can't just wander in and join our tribe. There are rules, you know. But Eska's voice trailed off. I'd be an extra pair of hands about the place. I'd help. It doesn't work like that, Flint said. You'd have to be one of us from the start. He tossed his rucksack onto the fur-lined sled. Once we're in Deep Roots, you're on your own. I don't know who you are, what tribe you're from, or why the ice cream thinks your voice is so important. But I just missed my chance of freeing my ma because of you. You're the only reason I'm not leaving you here is because I don't trust you not to blab about my whereabouts to the Ice Queen. Pebble yapped from Flint's hood. And because Pebble is playing up. Pebble growled. Flint sighed. And, I suppose, because you might know things that could help us fight the Ice Queen. Satisfied now, Pebble settled into Flint's hood. Flint shoved Eska off the brake, pushed his own foot down on it, and glowered at the ball of white fur curled up in his hood. I blame you entirely for this detour, Pebble. You're going to have some serious explaining to do when we see Tompkin. Pebble pretended to snore, and Flint rolled his eyes. But when the wolverine's growl jutted across the sea outside, he pointed to the sled. Sit down on the furs in front. Flint lifted the camouflage cape over his shoulders and hauled the end of the cape up a little so that I can see out ahead of us. He paused. But don't expect any conversation from me. It's hard to steer a sled, be cross and talk all at the same time. Can I just ask your name? Eska stammered. Flint scowled. Why? Why do you need to know it? Eska blinked. In case we do decide to have more conversations. It's Flint. There was a pause. But we won't be having any more conversations for a while. Eska nodded meekly. Then Flint lifted his foot from the brake and, as the dogs hastened into the tunnel, the wolverine's growl petered out into silence. Chapter 5. Eska. They emerged from the tunnel and, when Eska eventually plucked up the courage to peek out from the cape and glance over her shoulder, she saw the dark shapes of the Tusk Guard spreading out over the driftlands in the opposite direction. Relief rinsed through her, and, as she slipped back beneath the blanket, she felt her pulse unwind. With every stride the dogs took, she was moving further and further away from the woman who had held her captive for so long. The wooden sled creaked as it rushed over the ice, and the cold air funneling through the cape stiffened the muscles in Eska's face. But, for the first time since being locked inside the Ice Queen's music box, Eska smiled. Because she had escaped, finally, and the landscape she had watched in silence for so long was now alive all around her. Her heart fluttered at the freedom of it all, and she wiggled her hands in front of her chest. What are you doing? Hissed Flint. Eska did a little circle with her elbow. Getting used to my body again? Well, don't! Flint spat. It's distracting. Sit still. Eska stared ahead for a few minutes and tried her best not to be annoying. Then, very quietly, she began tracing her fingers over her arms and legs for a mark from the sky gods that might show she was cursed. But she found nothing, and so she went back to very subtly circling her elbows instead. Snow clouds are gathering, Flint whispered to himself. Our tracks will be covered by morning. Eska stole a look at the night sky, and as she watched the darkness closing in, she tried to work out whether Flint's words were an opening for a conversation or not. She had no reason to trust him. After all, he hadn't planned to rescue her, it had just sort of happened. But without Flint, she'd still be trapped inside Winterfang, and though she didn't want to irritate him, she was longing to talk to someone after so many months of silence. She had to know more about the Fur and Feather tribe children. Where were they hiding? Might they bend their rules and offer her shelter and protection? Could she team up with them to fight back against the Ice Queen? And, her deepest desire of all, would they know who she really was? She tucked the music box key into her pocket, hoping that now that she had it, the Ice Queen would not be able to use the music box again, for her or anybody else. Tell me about those in hiding from the Ice Queen, Eska said quietly. That sounds dangerously like conversation to me, Flint replied, urging his dogs on. There were no fences or roads in the Driftlands, at least none that Eska could see beyond the gap in the cape, and the moonlight was almost completely swallowed by the clouds now. But it seemed Flint knew this wide and lonely landscape. Somehow its shapes and rhythms were locked in his skull, and he swerved the sled through a scattering of trees, then down a shallow bank until it skidded out onto a frozen river coated in snow. Please tell me, Eska whispered, because if you're planning to leave me, I'll need more information than I have now to survive. Why does the Ice Queen think your voice is so important? It's not like the other voices, I'll give you that. But it's feeble all the same, and you don't even know anything. Eska was almost afraid of the answer, of the darkness that the Ice Queen said her voice was capable of. But she had the boy's attention now, and she wanted to keep it. The Ice Queen is feeding on her prisoners' voices, Eska said. She watched the river race beneath the dog's paws, and if she can swallow every voice in Erkenwald before the midnight sun rises, she'll become immortal, and will rule this kingdom forever. Eska heard the squeak of mittens tightening around the wooden bar behind her, but when Flint spoke, his voice betrayed no emotion. What's that got to do with you? Why is your voice any more important than her other prisoners? Eska took a deep breath. The Ice Queen told me that the Sky Gods placed a curse on my voice to make it capable of terrible things. She promised to help me. She said she would take away my cursed voice and use it to summon the outlawed tribes, then tear down the Sky Gods so that they could never harm Erkenwald again. Flint didn't reply, and as Eska listened to the near-silent sound of snow pattering against the cape, she wondered what he was thinking. Could he sense the shame in her voice at the idea that she might be cursed? Was he planning to tip her off the sled and leave her for dead because of it? The silence was broken by his snigger. No one believes in the Sky Gods or their magic anymore. Not after the Northern Lights stopped, and Eska saw her chance. But you still believe, in their magic at least. She paused. Back at the palace I saw a lot of dark magic, but what if there's another kind of magic out there? One that could be used for good? One that could be harnessed to make secret capes? She bit her lip, because that's what you did, didn't you? You used magic to outwit the Ice Queen. Flint shifted behind her. I can't remember anything about my past, Eska went on. The Ice Queen stole my memories, but I get feelings about things deep in my gut. And somehow I never believed her when she blamed the gods for the tribes hating each other. I reckon that was her doing. She paused. I think the Sky Gods are still up there, and their magic might be something we can trust after all. Although Flint said nothing, Eska could feel his thoughts whirring close to hers. Theirs was a kingdom that had given up on magic, and yet here on this sled were two people who believed in its power, even if one was too proud to admit it. If the Ice Queen lied about the Sky Gods, Eska said, then maybe she lied about my voice too, and not about it being important, otherwise she wouldn't have gone to such lengths to steal it. But what if it's not cursed? What if I could use my voice for good? Her words were gathering pace now. I didn't give it to the Ice Queen because I thought that perhaps if I escaped, I could somehow use my voice and a little bit of magic to fight back against her and to free all of the prisoners. Flint snorted. I've heard powerful voices before, warrior battle cries and chief speeches, but yours, it's odd and unlikely. There's no way it could destroy the Ice Queen. He paused. And as for magic, good luck convincing an entire kingdom that it's something they could and should believe in again. Eska found herself looking at the camouflage cape. If she knew one thing about magic from her time in Winterfang, it was that it was an unpredictable sort of business that required a good deal of faith to get it to going in the first place. Not all brilliant ideas start off ordinary and likely, she said. Flint drove on without speaking, but Eska could sense by his silence that her words had hit home, and she let the quiet linger for a while before pressing Flint in a different direction. I pieced together bits about the kingdom's landscape from eavesdropping on the Tusk Guards, but what about the children in hiding? Tell me about them. Fine, Flint replied after a while, but only because I can't drive the rest of this journey with Pebble biting me on the ear until I've answered your questions. The fox pup leapt down onto the sled and busied himself between Eska's ankles. The Feather Tribe are somewhere in the Nevercliffs, Flint began, though I've not seen them since before the battle last summer. We used to share food around campfires if we crossed paths on hunting trips, and once a feather boy lent me a quiver of arrows when my own was swept downriver. But everything changed when the Tusk chief was murdered. He paused. We don't speak to the Feather Tribe now, and certainly not to the Tusks. Outlaws keep to their own kind. Eska frowned. And how do you learn new things? We've learnt them already, Flint snapped. But if the Feather and Fur tribes turn their backs on each other, then you can't swap ideas or make plans together to free the Ice Queen's prisoners. Flint bristled. The Fur tribe have made plans, lots of them, just not with the Feathers. They can't be trusted. Eska watched the dark speed by. The kingdom she had been longing to explore from the music box was nothing like the place she found herself in now. She'd been hoping for friends and answers, but here was discord and secrets. It was a bleaker, colder world than the one she had imagined, and she hugged her coat tighter around her. And your parents? Eska asked. Do you believe they're trapped in the ice towers at Winterfang? Flint's voice seemed tighter suddenly. I know my ma is because every morning I hear her voice trail out over Erkenwald. But my pa, he was the chief of Fur tribe, the best warrior we've ever seen. But the Ice Queen used dark magic to fight him, and he died on the ice during the battle last summer. Flint fell silent, and Pebble scrambled up towards him and pawed at his neck. My brother Tompkin is chief now. Eska nodded. And what will he say when you return without your ma? Flint pulled off the camouflage cape and tossed it onto Eska's lap. The snow-filled night surrounded them, and Eska could make out the dark outlines of trees either side of the river now, and further downstream a waterfall shrouded in ice. Flint stared straight ahead. He doesn't know I left. And even Eska could tell that the conversation had come to an end then. The dogs ran on, and as the hours slipped by, Eska felt her eyes beginning to close. A sharp nudge from behind jolted her awake. Keep your eyes open, Flint muttered. Close them in this cold and they'll freeze shut. Eska looked ahead to where the river widened, then turned left. Nestled inside the bend, there was a small wooden hut surrounded by trees. The larch trees it had been made from were shelved with snow. But Eska could make out a door, and Flint guided his dogs onto the riverbank and pulled them to a stop before it. Stand on the brake, he ordered Eska, properly this time. She scurried round to the back of the sled while Flint untied the huskies and tethered them inside a small outhouse to the side of the hut. The dogs need a rest, he said. It's another few hours to the Fur tribe hideout, and we're a safe distance from Winterfang now. We'll leave again at first light. Eska squinted through the driving snow. You mean you're taking me to see your tribe? The possibility of being welcomed and looked after by others made her heart flutter. She had been abandoned at Winterfang. No one had come forward to rescue her, or even say they knew her. But now there was an opening, a chance of friendship. Flint shrugged. I'm taking you to see my brother. Briefly. Then I'm leaving you to fend for yourself. Eska's heart sank. This wasn't a promise of safety after all, but she tried to hide her disappointment. It was a small step in the right direction after all, Winterfang that counted for everything. She glanced at Flint. You're interested in my voice, aren't you? You think that your brother should know about me. I'm mildly curious, Flint replied. There's a difference. But you'll need to speak to Tompkin first. He's in charge, and if he thinks your voice will help with his battle plan, he'll use it. Oh, I've turned too many pages. Eska flinched. Your tribe are going to fight the Ice Queen? Flint held his head high. One day. Yeah. We're not staying at home like last time when our parents made us promise to hide until they returned. He straightened up. And it'll be Tompkin who leads us. He's the best warrior in the tribe now. Pa isn't around. Esker bit her lip. You won't win. I know the Ice Queen. It'll take more than spears and shields to force her back. You don't know Tompkin. If anyone can take on the Ice Queen, it's him. Flint hefted his rucksack onto his back and pulled open the door of the hut. Esker stood shivering by the sled. Is it safe for me? Flint nodded. It's an old fur tribe food store. There are lots of them dotted all over Erkenwald if you know where to look. He disappeared inside with Pebble, and Esker followed nervously, closing the door against the flurries of snow. It was pitch black within. Keep still, Pebble, muttered Flint. I need to find the caribou tallow and the heather so that we can see what's what. Flint squinted in the dark. Esker squinted in the dark. Can I help? Flint grunted. Esker tried again. Tell me what I'm looking for, at least. First rule of the wild. Know how to make a fire. You're looking for stone dish filled with hardened caribou fat, Flint said, and a wick of heather. That's a plant that grows out on the tundra, in case you don't know. Esker felt her way around the wooden walls, nearly tripping over 2 large wooden objects tucked into the corners of the hut. Then her palms met with a stone dish set between these objects. Here, she cried. I think it's here. Flint fumbled towards her, then stooped to touch the dish. He rummaged in his pockets and drew out 2 small rocks, and for several minutes the hut was filled with this quiet scuffing of metal. Then sparks appeared, and he set them to the heather wick, and within seconds a soft light flickered. The wooden objects Esker had stumbled on were beds laden with blankets made from the furs of snow hares, and Esker looked around to see clumps of moss had been stuffed into the walls to block the cracks in the timber. There was a table beneath a lamp, and above it hooks made from antlers. They sat down on the beds, and Flint turned his anything knife over in his hands. He said nothing, but Esker could tell when he kicked his boot against the bed leg, and Pebble leapt up onto his mat that he was angry at not returning with his ma. She picked at her nails. I'm sorry we couldn't free your ma. Flint didn't look up. One day, I'll repay you for rescuing me from the palace, though, Esker added. I doubt that very much. Esker glanced at the knife in Flint's hands. The handle was made of bone, and slotted into the hilt was a blue gem, which shimmered mischievously. That knife, she said slowly. It's built using magic again, just like your cape. She leant forward. You're an inventor, aren't you? Flint's face hardened. I'm a warrior like the rest of my tribe. But the more time Esker spent with Flint, the more she felt that she wasn't like the rest of his tribe at all. From what he had said, the fur tribe didn't believe in Erkenwald's magic, and yet he clearly did. And while none of them seemed keen to welcome strangers, Flint, despite his reservations, had. To Esker, Flint seemed a strange kind of warrior, and she wondered whether she wasn't the only one who felt like an outsider. Maybe Flint felt different from everyone else too, but his guard was up, so she offered her next words as a truce. You're a warrior who believes in magic, and I think that's the best way to be, because you won't defeat the Ice Queen with weapons alone. Flint cocked his head. Isn't it time you stopped talking? He stood up and walked over to the corner of the room where a spear carved from caribou antler had been stashed. Grabbing it, he headed for the door. Get some sleep, he muttered. You look like you need it. And now that the light has returned to the kingdom, you won't get long before dawn is up. Where are you going? Flint opened the door. To get food, and I'm going alone. But Esker didn't roll over and go to sleep. She hurried to the wall facing the river, pulled out a clump of moss and peered through. She watched intently as Flint carved a hole in the iced-up river with his spear, and then sat down beside it, his back against the rush of snow. Esker waited, and, though her hands ached from the climb down the palace wall and her throat burned from speaking after so many months of silence, she did not turn away. She needed to learn the ways of the wild, fast, and, if there was one thing she was good at, it was watching the world from a distance. And we're going to leave it there. And I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Have a lovely day.